I'm Susan McClary. I'm a professor of musicology at UCLA. I've been here for 13 years. Before I came here, I taught at the University of Minnesota and at McGill University in Montreal. I got into musicology in a rather interesting way, and this will explain a lot of the rather strange directions I have pursued. I was being trained as a piano major at Southern Illinois University. I had listened to classical music from the crib. My father wanted to saturate me with classical music. There was never a time when I didn't know all of the Beethoven symphonies, all of the Brahms symphonies, and so on. And when I started college, I actually felt that I could tell what was going on in anything in the common practice repertory, and very quickly became sought after as a coach for performers, string quartets or singers who wanted someone to help them figure out how to make sense of a score would come to me. And I was doing that really at a very early age. It was quite extraordinary. Then I took my first music history class, and I encountered early music. I had never heard anything like this. It puzzled me, it delighted me, and I thought probably what musicologists did was to figure out how that music worked, how I could approach it in the same way I approached Bach or Mozart. And so I went off to graduate school at Harvard thinking that's what I would do. Well, musicology at that time had almost nothing to do with music. You could be an archivist and go off and find facts about the production of music. You could edit music, because we have an enormous backlog of music from the past that has never made it, even today, into performing editions that most musicians can read. But you couldn't really deal with the music itself. And I felt, even at that time, and when I was coaching Bach or Mozart, I always felt that one had to be able to connect the music to its historical moment, that styles were not arbitrary, that you had to have some sense of what the aesthetic and expressive priorities were at each moment in order to make sense of scores and then to translate them into sound. So I've always been working in an intersection between performance, music theory and analysis, and history and culture. I've never known how to divide those apart from each other. I still don't. I don't know how I would do any of my work if I didn't know how to do that. But in graduate school, I was told that we don't deal with the music itself. We are learning how to be archivists. So I would work in my classes, and I would pretend to be doing a dissertation on archival work, and then I would go down with a score in the basement to try to figure out what made it tick. And hours later, they would throw me out of the building because they were going to close it down. I would realize once again that I'd been carried away with the music, and I wasn't supposed to do that. It was a terrible guilty pleasure, this music stuff. When I finally got my degree and began to teach, I started trying to implement the way I had thought music studies ought to be carried out all the way along. That is, the very stringent intersection among performance, music theory and analysis, history and culture. And I began teaching that way. I also tried writing that way. And no one in any of the music disciplines recognized what I was writing as being something they could deal with. You know, the music theorists would say, that's musicology. The musicologist would say, that's music theory. And I continued to work in this area until I began to get involved with interdisciplinary centers. This was in the mid-1980s. And I found that the Center for Humanistic Studies and the Center for the Study of Women at the University of Minnesota both had very, very exciting intellectuals working cutting-edge theories. And that finally I had ways of trying to put these things together. I would pop up in their conferences and I would say, well, you know, in music it also works that way. And they would think, who let her in? What does music have to do with anything we're talking about? But then they would become very excited. So I became sort of the token musician in a lot of interdisciplinary programs, and eventually was heading these programs. I think I was so invested in finding a way of making sense of my view of the world that I was willing to put more energy into those enterprises than anyone else. And it was in those contexts, in interdisciplinary contexts, that my work began to be published. When it began to be published in feminist journals, in cultural critique, in places like that, suddenly there was a buzz about it, and people in music studies had to pay attention to it. They weren't very happy about it to start with, but it really changed the face of musicology. And I'm very pleased to say that I've been welcomed back into the official discipline of music theory now. I'm being invited to do seminars in music theory symposia and things of that sort. So I think that that vision of insisting that that performance of music, the analysis of music, the historical and cultural dimensions of music must always be integrated, has become now accepted across a very wide group of people. It's a great pleasure to see this.